Dr. Lee, first of all, it's so lovely to finally meet you. I know so much about you because I've been following your work for the past decade or so.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Before we kick things off, I just wanted to tell you a bit about myself so you have some context on my background. But I started this platform called WellnStrong. I started it in 2020, and it began as a means for me to just share the research I was doing with my mom. She was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer back in 2018. So I'm a huge advocate of integrative medicine. That has always been my passion. I started this podcast about 2 years ago. And interestingly, Dr. Leaf, the mission has shifted quite a bit from more of like a physical-based approach to wellness and integrative medicine to now more of a faith-based approach to wellness. And that has been reflected in my podcast conversation. So I've been having a lot more chats with pastors, folks like yourself in the mental health space, applying scripture and God's word to our daily lives and improving our mental health and then subsequently our physical health. So conversations like these are truly why I wake up every morning, and I'm so excited for my podcast. But you're brilliant. Like I said, I've been a longtime fan of your work, so it's truly an honor to have you on today.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for that background, and I'm sorry about your mom, and
thank you.
I hope she's doing okay. And so thank you for that background. I appreciate that. And the mind is everything, so we have to understand the mind. It's really important. So that's really great, wonderful.
So to kick things off, Dr. Leaf, as I said, I've been following your work for quite some time now, and what I love most about you is how you translate modern brain science into language everyone can understand. But by far, my favorite part is how you integrate biblical principles, right, with neuroscience. And in fact, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing right now, Dr. Leaf, I probably would be following in your footsteps. And as I was prepping for this conversation, I was thinking back on my younger days, and I vividly remember at age 7, I was sitting downstairs in my parents' rec room watching open brain surgery, and I was just enamored and fascinated with all things brain. And my parents, thought I was going to go to medical school, but that avenue didn't happen. But all that to say, neuroscience, neuroplasticity, how the mind impacts our physical being is a passion of mine. So I'm so excited to kind of pick your brain today.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, thank you for such a great introduction. And you couldn't be more interested in a more important field, because the mind is literally 99% of who we are. So, and we need to understand more about it. So it's really important.
Absolutely. So to kick things off, Dr. Leaf, one consistent theme in your work is the idea that, as you said, the mind is the most powerful thing in the universe after God. And that despite what many people believe, our bodies are not in control of our minds, but our minds are in control of our bodies. So I'd love to start at a very basic level for listeners. Could you define what actually is a thought? And how do thoughts become physical substances in the brain? Because that is certainly something that I didn't know prior to reading your work, and again, was just flabbergasted when I heard about all this new research.
I know it's quite amazing. It's new research, but it's very ancient research. So for thousands of years, philosophers and scientists and people that are in spiritual research and spiritual teachers have been teaching that the mind and brain are separate but connected. So we mind, brain, and body, not just brain. And I've been in the field 40 years now. And 40 years ago, when I was at university doing my first degree, and I've done 4, they actually told that our teaching was around the mind and the brain being separate. But the concept of the brain being able to change or not being able to change, that was very dominant. So so we were trained that the brain couldn't change, but we were trained that the mind was separate from the brain. Fast forward to the mid-90s, where they actually said the brain and the mind are the same thing, which is not correct at all scientifically. There's no science to back that up. So we transitioned from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, talking about mind, brain, body, and actually for thousands of years before that. And then from the mid-90s, transitioned to talking about mind and brain being the same thing. And I'm coming to your answer on the thoughts, but we need to understand the mind-brain connection first. So the change happened around the mid-90s, where we developed a very neurocentric approach. And I should say, not we, because that's just one strain of science, one branch of science sort of dominating the general speak of that the average audience layperson is exposed to, and a very physicalist dominant type of science took over. And what that means is that it was all about the brain, neuroreductionism, because we were discovering all these incredible things about the brain and how the brain worked. And so then MRI technology, being able to see inside the brain and see the blood flow and all that kind of thing, made people think that, well, the brain is it. So then started a whole field of research looking for the neurobiological correlates of consciousness. And what that big statement means is that they thought, well, the brain is it. So therefore the brain is producing our thoughts, our consciousness, our emotions, whatever you want to call it. And so it's all about brain. And that is where we started going very, very wrong in science, or where science started going very, very wrong, because that avenue started dominating the research and the funding and that kind of thing. But it was never really, and to this day, it's never really been, you can't prove, you cannot, there's no science that says the brain produces the mind. There's no formula, and every research study done that talks about your brain is making you do this and your amygdala makes you do that. If you actually look at the research, you'll see that people are told a story, or they're asked about what's going on in their life, or they're doing something with their mind. They're having a conversation, they're having an experience. So they're using their mind, and then they're looking at the results in the brain. So I say all of that to say that the mind and the brain are separate. They're not the same thing. So we shouldn't speak about the mind and the brain as one sentence, but see it as two separate entities. The brain is part of the body, and the brain and the body are only around about 1% of who we are. It doesn't mean they're not important. I mean, the brain is extremely important, and so is the body, because that the mind needs that physical conduit for us to be able to show up physically in this life. But the mind animates the brain. So when a person dies, within 10 seconds of the heart stopping or 20 seconds of the heart stopping, the brain flatlines, and every single cell of the brain and the body start to disintegrate. And so when that life force has gone out of you, the physical will no longer function. So the life force that makes us physically be able to move and talk and experience everything we do with our bodies is the mind. The mind is this massive energetic field, life force that drives the physical brain and the body, almost like a virtual reality type situation, where your brain and body are like the computer, and your mind is kind of driving it with almost like a headset. It's like a virtual reality type situation. But the computer that is the virtual reality is playing into can't do anything on its own. It has to be driven by something. And the headset, even the headset is driven by something else, because the person's got to put the headset on and start the virtual reality. So everything physical needs to be run by something, and that something is mind. So mind is this huge part of us that drives everything about us, and mind creates thoughts. So mind is the creator of thoughts, and thoughts are the response to life's experiences. So this conversation is an experience. People are seeing and hearing us, and they're hearing words, and that's auditory sound waves, and it's energy, and basically breaks down at its most basic form to light energy. And the mind takes this, and each of our minds takes this and converts and processes this into a thought. And that thought is like a cluster of little energetic particles, like a little cloud. So if you think of your mind as the sky, and I'm doing this with my arms, so we have what we call a biofield around and through us, which seems to be the zone of each of our unique minds, because we each have our own unique mind, and then we're all together in this world, and we're connected to an ultimate mind. So we've got this mind, and the mind is doing all the work. The mind is brilliant. The mind is processing, receiving 100% of our environment in different ways. And then it builds this experience into this little cloud of energy, and it places that cloud of energy makes like a copy and puts it into the brain. So here I've got a little model of the brain. So if you can imagine, our conversation is becoming a little cloud around me. So here's my little cloud, and then I, with my mind, make a copy of this and put it into the brain, and that generates an electromagnetic and quantum and neurochemical and genetic response in the brain. And all that happening creates little proteins, and those proteins are holding my words. And that's a thought growing inside the brain. But it doesn't just grow in the brain. Because as I'm speaking, I'm giving words. Each word and concept that I'm giving is basically memory, and it's clustering together into a thought. So thoughts are made of memory. So all my words, the details of what I'm saying are the memories, but the whole conversation is a thought. So it's building here, and as it's building here, it's been put into there. So here it's energy, here it's physical proteins. But it's not only in your brain, it's also throughout your body. So each part of your body is holding a different perspective of this memory. So it's kind of like it's clustered here, then there's different angles or perspectives in every part of our body. So it's throughout our body. So memory is even in your fingertips. I mean, it's everywhere. It's across the entire mind-brain-body network. And it's this relationship between mind, brain, and body that enables us to then function. So the thought gets built into the brain and the body, and then we speak from that thought. So right now, my words are going in your brain and doing all through the mind and brain and body. And then as you're formulating your response, it's because you've actually now, your mind is processing and adding to this network that's going into your brain, and you're creating a question. And you already had created a thought in your mind, brain, and body when you prepared for this interview. So this is what we do all day long. I mean, we do this at 400 billion actions per second. So bottom line is, thoughts are real things created by our mind in response to life experiences, and then obviously we've been creating these since in the womb. So we have millions of existing experiences that are thoughts filled with memories. So as you're listening to me now, the listeners, viewers, yourself, not only are you building this new thought, it becomes this tree-like network in your brain and your body, but you from the words I'm saying, but it's also triggering existing thought networks with their memories, which are helping you to understand and process and make your own decisions around this information. So it's a very complex thing that's happening, but essentially your mind creates thoughts, and thoughts are then put into the brain and the body and wired into the brain and the body. And it's that connection, mind, brain, body, and thoughts that enables us to then function in life. So how we show up, what we say, what we do, how we're feeling, our perspectives, is all based on the thoughts that we've built. So they're not just random. Everything you do and say is coming from these thoughts. So if we look at what we do and what we say, we can track back to the thoughts that we've built, and then we can analyze the source of those thoughts, because we don't always build the best thoughts. We sometimes, we can build toxic thoughts from toxic experiences or toxic perspectives, or the things going on in our life that are influencing us that we're not questioning enough, and that kind of thing. And so therefore, there's thoughts. Thoughts are real things. So I've said a lot.
It's so fascinating. No, I love it all. And one thing you alluded to that I want to get into is the concept of epigenetics, right? And how our thoughts can actually impact gene expression. And Dr. Leaf, I'm a huge, again, I geeked out when you spoke about this in your book, because epigenetics has always been very fascinating to me. But you talk about this switch gene called the Krebs gene, which can be turned on by our thoughts. How does that work? And why is that so important to know for people who, I guess, could say have negative predispositions in their thinking patterns?
Okay, so you're referring to one of my really, really old books. I've written 19.
Yes. I have your latest Dr. Leaf right here, Help in a Hurry.
Okay, great.
And I have Switch on Your Brain was my very first book that I ever read of yours. So I was like, I have to chat about that.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, and then there's books, there's even older books than that. So there's like nearly 25 books now or something. But yeah, so the Krebs gene is one of I spoke about that in one of the very early books, but essentially it's a gene that basically, it's one of many. Nothing ever works in isolation. So I say with caution, yes, the Krebs gene is activated. It plays a very big role in switching on the process of wiring in what you're hearing into thoughts. So basically, as I mentioned, we have this cloud of energy that our mind, it processes the information into the details and into the information, which are the memories, into thoughts, and those thoughts put in the brain. As they hit the brain and the body, it then activates this electrochemical, neurochemical, quantum energy, and genetic response. And one of the clusters of genes activated is the Krebs gene. What's important for us is to realize that there's a physical response to our mind. That's what's really important, a physical response and an actual building of a physical network of that's because genes, when a gene is switched on. What that means is that it then sends out the instructions to make an amino acid, and an amino acid groups to form a protein. And when proteins cluster together, they form a network. And those proteins hold information in the form of vibrations. So my words, the details, the memories are vibrations inside of these clusters of groups of amino acids that are proteins. And the CREB gene basically just plays a role in that. So we are switching genes on and off with our mind, which then produces this physical response in the brain and the body. We are also with our mind every moment of every day. We are building 800,000 to 1 million new cells literally every second. Wow. And those cells will make up every organ of our body, and our organs make up our systems, and our systems of our brain and our body are how we function. And that's that animation aspect that I was speaking about earlier on. So how the quality of a CREB gene, and just not it doesn't work alone with all the genes, the quality of the instruction to the gene, and this is epigenetics, the quality of our mind, the thoughts that we're thinking provides the epigenetic over and above the gene, the environment that switches the gene on or off, and which cluster and how it switches on and all that kind of stuff, and how the network forms and the kind of information that goes into the network. All of that is determined by what we are thinking and what we are creating. So we're thinking with our mind, we're creating thoughts, and that influences all of this genetic process and chemical, neurochemical, neurohormonal, et cetera. And the result is lots of physical changes inside of our brain and our body. So if I am constantly negative or worrying about something, and I have a sort of mindset that is negative, so I'm worrying that this is going to go wrong or that's going to go wrong, and seeing that viewpoint is going to be is going to be the filter through which I build that little cloud. And instead of seeing all the possibilities, I get stuck in the conscious mind. I get stuck in a conscious mind viewpoint. And the conscious mind is great, but it's a workhorse. And it needs advice. It needs to be guided by the subconscious and the non-conscious, not the unconscious. That's when you're asleep. It's a brain state. So I'm talking about conscious, subconscious, and non-conscious. Now, non-conscious is our deepest level, our spiritual level, our wise level, our intuitive level. What we see from research is that if your conscious mind works alone, it's logical, but the logic is not always very good. It makes decisions, thinks, feels, and chooses, but it's not always very effective. So our conscious mind needs to always be connecting with the subconscious and the non-conscious. And the non-conscious is where wisdom resides, where our perfect knowledge is, where all problems plus the solutions to those problems lie. Everything lies there. Yeah. The problem is that when we get very busy with life and we get stuck in certain patterns, it means that we've kind of switched off that pathway. We've closed the door to the non-conscious. Then we don't think clearly. And we're thinking. You're never not thinking. You're thinking, you're creating, but you're now working in a very sort of basic way, conscious mind-brain loops. And so that will just activate patterns in the brain that are familiar. And then you start predicting and operating in the same pattern. That's why people get stuck and do the same thing and keep worrying and keep getting stuck in the same negative pathway, or keep thinking, like, if they've never dealt with like a body image issue, or they've never dealt with an issue from childhood, or they've never dealt with whatever, those patterns. And when I say never dealt with, until we connect with the non-conscious and we do the work of rewiring, deconstructing and reconstructing, we will get stuck in that conscious mind-brain loop until we stand back and rewire the correct version of that loop. So that's essentially what's happening there.
Yeah, so interesting. There's certainly a lot of overlap, Dr. Leaf, between these two books, and I'm sure among all your books too, but going back to Switch Your Brain before we jump into Help in a Hurry, you talk about this neurocycle concept, and you will be proud of me. I am on day 2 of my 21-day neurocycle in attempting to redesign an old memory from a few years ago.
And are you doing the app, or are you doing the actual brain detox
I'm
course?
Doing the course. The course.
Wonderful. The one that we're running currently for the brain detox.
And I will link that in the podcast, but I think it's so empowering, and I'm sure listeners would agree, to know that just because your parents or your grandparents, right, you spoke about thoughts being passed down to the 3rd and 4th generations, just because you may have that predisposition, right, in your family in terms of a certain thinking pattern, it doesn't mean that you are ultimately going to go that same route. And one thing that you said that was very, very powerful, like I mentioned before, is you can actually redesign a memory. And that, I'm sure, has played a significant role in patients, I'm sure, who you've dealt with PTSD and all the like. But I'm really excited to kickstart that. But you also mentioned, and again, going back to Help in a Hurry now, chaotic mind. And Dr. Leaf, I left my full-time job last year to pursue WellnStrong full-time. And I share that with you because I feel like within the past year, chaos is the perfect word to describe what has been going on in my mind, just because, as I'm sure you resonate with, you wear all the hats when you run a business. And I feel I'm being pulled in so many different directions, which is why Help in a Hurry was such a blessing for me. But for listeners out there who also are, whether they're a mom, a full-time mom, or an entrepreneur who just feel like their mind is utter chaos, where would you tell them to start, right, in unpacking all of that?
Well, that's really great thank you. That's a great question. And the book that you're referring to is this one, Help in a Hurry, which came out just a few months ago. So to come back to your question that you sort of entered into the question with, you commented that you love the fact that we can rewire our brain. And that's literally what we're doing. So to summarize everything that we said to lead into this question, I have an image over here for those of you that are listening. I'm holding up a wiry looking toxic tree that if you've ever watched me before, you would have seen it. And this represents a toxic thought. So any experience that we've had, whether it's a trauma, which is severe things that have happened to us that we have no control over, like abuse, etc., or whether we've just developed a bad habit, like just got into the habit of worrying because we just didn't control it, or we just got so caught up in social media that we kept comparing ourselves to others, or we got caught up into hustle culture, or whatever habit because we've all got them. We've all got a bunch of trauma. We've all got a bunch of bad habits. All of those, when we talk about rewiring those, this is a thought. This would be a thought, and all the branches are the memories. So when we talk about rewiring memories, you're actually rewiring a whole thought and changing what those memories look like inside of you. So you can't change what's happened to you, the thing that caused the PTSD response and so on. But we can change, because your story is always part of you, but you can change what it looks like inside of you. Right. So the whole point of the Neurocycle, which is the formula that I've developed for helping you to identify all the neuroscience, the complex neuroscience and psychoneurobiology of helping you to stand back and observe, how are you showing up in the chaos, for example, to use the example that you had. What does that chaos look like? How can I track it back to the thought or the thoughts? And how can I, because the branches of the tree would be how it's manifesting in your life. The tree trunk is what was the processing? What were you thinking? How did you process it? And was it, through the correct processing or incorrect way of processing? And what was the source, the roots? Now, as I said, you can't change it, but when you look at it, you can weaken this. And when you weaken this, you can reconstruct it. You can't pull it out, but you can reconstruct it. So eventually it shrinks and becomes really small. And that takes about 63 days to do that, and it becomes, and I've got a healthy one over here, I'm holding up a healthy green plant just as a representation. So this would be a healthy thought, the roots being the source memories and the branches being all the other memories. So this would represent chaos, the toxic looking one, and this would represent managing the chaos. And whatever caused the chaos never goes away, but it shrinks and becomes weak and has no power. So it's just a teeny little hint inside the green healthy plant. And that takes time. That takes a regular applying your mind, doing mind work daily, and the mind work that you do is called the Neurocycle. So the 21-day detox course that you're referring to now is a basic introduction into this idea of the Neurocycle, how to use it and train you. And then I have an app called the Neurocycle app, which I'm sure you've seen in this book as well, which helps you then take that over 63 days. So these just, the different components. In terms of where to start is with that understanding, realizing that, okay, so the way I'm showing up, chaos is a behavior. Mm-hmm. It's one of the behaviors that we have manifesting. It's a behavioral signal. So we've got to look, what we see from science is that there are 4 signals that work together, 4 categories of signals. They never work alone. So behaviors would be one, behavioral signals, and chaos would be that behavioral signal. Now, along with that, there would be emotions. So there's emotional signals. So if you think of it, chaos can make you feel worried, can make you feel anxious, it can make you feel edgy, it can make you feel all kinds of things. So what are the emotions linked with that chaos? That behavior of chaos. Then what is where do you feel that in your body? Maybe there's tension in your shoulders, maybe there's a gut-wrenching ache or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is, how's this affecting your perspective? In other words, your outlook, your view, your attitude. And what one can do is you look at those 4 categories, and then you reflect on those. Basically, you reflect on, why am I feeling this chaos in this moment? And then you would go deeper and see what else is related around this chaos. So you start peeling the onion, like you go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you start thinking, okay, well, can I see this differently? And then what action can I take in this moment? And that's a 5-step process that you do daily, where you gather awareness of the signals, you reflect on the signals, you bring up and mindstorm whatever other signals come to your mind. You then reconceptualize those or look at them differently. This has happened. What can I do in this moment? Not for the next week, just for today, for this moment. And what action can I take? So when you're in that chaotic moment, it's to get your mind under control. As you go through those 5 steps, you immediately open the door to what I mentioned earlier, which is your non-conscious, N-O-N. Your non-conscious is the deepest spiritual level of you. It's where your intelligence, which is unlimited, is activated. It's where your imagination and creativity are just perfect. It's where your intuition and insight is phenomenal. So where your logic is operating phenomenally. So we always want to tap into that level, but we only tap into that level when we stand back and observe ourselves. And you can do that in a 63-second moment. You can literally train yourself to stand back and observe and say, okay, let me look at let me quickly run through these 5 steps in these 63 seconds. Then you can start, that teaches you to start opening the door to the unconscious. Then the unconscious starts pouring wisdom, and you can use that same formula, the Neurocycle formula, to observe yourself over the next 5 days, 7 days, 5 to 7 days, to see the patterns. Once you find the pattern, then the pattern is a habit. That's a habit. That's an actual established thought pattern that's become a habit. And now you can put that into a 63-day neurocycle, because it takes 63 days to deconstruct this. Remember, this is made of proteins and chemicals. Right. And so it takes time to weaken it and rewire it into something that's healthy. And so this book, Help in a Hurry, gives you lots of examples of specific things. Like we did a survey of the top 18 areas that people feel create chaos in their life, and that's feeling under pressure. We in the hustle culture, productivity culture, things like black and white thinking, which just, it's this or that. Nothing's ever black or white. There's always an and or. An example of black and white thinking would be something like, I can't be feeling love for my children and guilt at the same time because I'm doing so much. The guilt will dominate. I'm guilty. I'm wrong. But you can be frustrated with your kids and love them at the same time. You can hold both, and you're frustrated because you're trying to do a lot. So we don't have enough compassion for ourselves. Black and white thinking makes us very, very hard on ourselves. It leads to another area that's like self-critical thinking, and all of these. So the 18 top areas that I identified in this book through research and so on are the combination of those. And we're not all operating in all of them, but most of us operate in people-pleasing, imposter syndrome, self-critical thought at different levels at different times. And those create this feeling of chaos. So in summary, first step is to have a lot of compassion for yourself and to stand back and observe yourself. Stand back and say, okay, this is not me. I'm not chaos. Chaos is not my name. Chaos is a state that I'm in at the moment because of stuff going on in my life. And I know there's stuff going on, but I'm now going to start refining that and getting more specific and analyzing that and going through a very specific formula to do that. And then you follow through, do the 63-second neurocycle. And I say 63 seconds because it's 5 steps, and you do each step in about 5 to 10 seconds. Right. And what we see from science is that if you can capture something in that 1 minute, you can completely alter and radically alter the experience of your life for the rest of the next hour, then the next day, then the rest of your life.
Dr. Leaf, it's so interesting. Is there a certain time of day where that's most beneficial to do? So, for example, I heard that within the first 5 to 10 minutes upon waking, that's when your subconscious is most impressionable. Is there any research to that?
Well, basically, your subconscious is the part of your mind. It's part of your mind that is between the non-conscious, that is infinite in space and speed and so on, and the conscious mind, which is awake when you're awake and is very limited. The subconscious is like a bridge between the two. Right. And what the non-conscious does is, because it's so fast and it's too fast for the conscious mind would explode, and so would the brain. So it has to be filtered. So it filters through the subconscious, and then the subconscious basically catches your attention with those 4 signals. And the 4 signals being your emotions, your body sensations that I mentioned, behaviors and perspectives. So when you wake up first thing in the morning, your brain has been in an unconscious state, which is not a mind level.
Right.
It's a state physically that your brain goes into when you sleep. And so when you're in an unconscious state, your non-conscious is still working, but your conscious mind and your subconscious mind are also asleep. So as you wake up, your brain physically wakes up, your non-conscious wakes up your brain, wakes up your subconscious, wakes up your conscious. And in that waking up, which happens in the morning when you wake up, or any time of the day when you wake up, it's that there's a whole change in your physiology and so on, and cortisol levels and all that sort of thing. So that is a very good time for you to check your mindset in that moment. And so it's great when you master the neurocycle, it's great to do a very quick neurocycle to say, okay, what's my mood meter at this moment? What are my emotions? And you can do this in 10 seconds once you get the hang of it. And it's really important to catch it at that moment, because the tone of your mindset for that moment sets the tone for the day. And we all know this, getting out of bed on the wrong side of the day has a viral effect on the rest of the day. So yes, the morning is very important to set the tone for the day. If you don't get it right, then you can always do it later in the day, but it's always best to pay attention to those signals. When is a good time to actively work on rewiring a network over 63 days? So the program that I have, it's recommended in the morning, but you know what? Sometimes the mornings are just too busy.
Right.
Sometimes you can only do it at lunchtime. So I don't like to get too strict on that, because I think it's very important that you can adjust it to your lifestyle. If you can do it first thing in the morning, I would definitely recommend that, because your cortisol levels are different. You're waking up, you're preparing for the day. But sometimes that's some people are just too sleepy at that point, and you've got kids and you've got life and you've got to, and
Right.
you've got to whatever, you've got your exercise routine or something, then just make sure you find a 15 to 30 minute time in the day where you can do a neurocycle. The other thing about the neurocycle is those 63-second ones. It's the same system, but used quicker. You can use that all day long. Like you can be now in this interview, and you can be, maybe I'm activating some kind of response in you from the words I'm saying. You can quickly use the neurocycle while staring at me to work out, how to manage that moment and what to say in the next question. So that's just kind of the different, levels that you can use it on.
So interesting. Dr. Leaf, you mentioned before MRI scans. If the otherwise, like for example, if I myself wanted to go get a brain scan to see what's actually going on in terms of like different regions being activated, am I able to do that? And what tests would that be? I've heard of an EEG and a functional MRI. Are those easily accessible or not necessarily?
No, they're very expensive, and you can't just go and get one done. We use in our neuroscience research with myself, my team, we use QEEG, which is a computerized version, quantitative version of EEG. EEG is when they put the cap on your head and it looks at the electrical signals. MRI is you go into a big tube and they basically look at the blood flow, and it's all magnetic resonance and so on. And then SPECT scan is another way of looking at physically, and then CT scans. But they're not things you just go and get done. They're very expensive, and they're done for medical reasons. Also, you can't look in your brain. What you're seeing is a response. You're not seeing thoughts. You can't read thoughts in your brain.
Right.
So like, for example, the MRI is lots of different slices that they put together. So it's not like, okay, that part's more active, therefore there's something wrong. Or if in an EEG, we're looking at electrical activity, we're looking at brain waves, and you can have someone who's very depressed and someone else who is in a highly meditative state where they're just getting like tremendous insight into like sort of a spiritual level, and their brains will have a similar sort of response. So you're not looking at a thought, you're looking at a pattern. It's kind of like standing on a 20-foot, standing on like 40 floors up in a building, and looking down at below in the street or beach or wherever you are, and you can see kids playing and you can hear the laughter because some sounds will rise, but you can't hear, you might see a cluster of kids or adults talking. You don't know if they're arguing, you don't know what they're saying, you just know there's activity, but you don't know if it's positive or negative activity, that kind of thing. So so it's not something, the most accessible is your QEEG, where you can go for you can have a QEEG done. It's you can have biofeedback sessions and so on, and we are developing within our app eventually, not now, so I shouldn't even really say it, but where you can get heads. Even now commercially available headsets are available that people can get.
This.
And they measure basic, and they give you a basic idea. So it's very interesting, but you're not reading your thoughts. It's very much just looking at the response, and it's great to help to the basic headsets that are $300 or $400. Those are basic things that just help. They're not reading your mind, though. Nothing can read your mind. They're just giving you a bit of an indication.
That makes sense. And Dr. Leaf, you mentioned meditation, and I'm so curious, what other daily interventions do you recommend to help manage a chaotic mind? And I've heard you talk about this in your other podcast episodes, and I've heard other people say as well, but I think there's a fine line, right, between the benefits of music and then overstimulus. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are in terms of what is a healthy balance for that. And I share that because I feel like sometimes I'm constantly overstimulating my brain in the sense of I'm always listening to a podcast or I'll always have music playing in the background. And I don't necessarily know, I guess, like what is a healthy balance, right, between creating time for silence and also, creating stimulus so your brain is always learning as well.
Very good question. So remember, your brain and body work together to learn, and they're not actually learning, they're just being coded, I should say. Your mind is doing all the work. So your mind and your conscious, you've got the 3 levels: conscious, subconscious, and non-conscious. And your non-conscious mind can handle everything, but your conscious mind can't, because it's not designed to handle everything. So it is important to find a balance, because whatever your conscious mind does, remember, your first mind, and then it puts it into the brain and the body, mind 99%. So when we feel the chaos, we're feeling it in our mind first. And if our mind is not listening to the non-conscious, it will get more chaotic. Then it will put a chaotic coding instruction into the brain, and then the brain will respond chemically and genetically, and our hormones will change, and our hypothalamic pituitary axis, which controls the stress response, will start responding. We'll start feeling it in a lot of stuff in our body. So yes, a balance is important. Bio-individuality is very important. Like, there's no one diet, there's no one form of exercise, there's no one rule. There's been a massive amount of emphasis in the last few years, especially with the whole wellness trend, on everyone should meditate. Meditation is the only way. There's a lot of in spiritual circles. Now, I'm not anti-meditation, but it's not the only way that you can actually get access to your deep spiritual level. You can have your eyes open, and and I've shown it with my research, you can get into deep meditative states with your eyes open in 63 seconds using the Neurocycle. You can do breathing exercise. You can do your prayer time, whatever. It's important to find what works for you, but you don't have to follow a trend. You need to play around with things to see what works for you. Periods of silence are important. It is good to stimulate. The brain is hungry for knowledge, but the brain and the body is hungry for coding. They are designed for coding, so they need coding. And the conscious mind is very hungry to learn. It's like a toddler. And the non-conscious mind is very happy to help the conscious mind learn. So there's a beautiful symphony going on, but it requires balance. That's why we sleep. That's why we need to have rest. That's why we need to restore. And so the brain and body get very, very tired, kind of like if you have all your apps open on your cell phone, your cell phone battery dies. So the balance is to have periods of silence, to have periods of restoration, and to maybe have periods of time where you don't have the podcast playing. I mean, it's nothing wrong with having the podcast playing, but maybe to just allocate periods in your day. One of the first signs when people have overstimulated the conscious mind, brain, body, you'll get a message from the non-conscious, and that message very often is a hovering anxiety and a bit of depression. And so that's not something wrong with you. That's your non-conscious mind saying, hey, your brain and body are just tired. You just literally need to switch everything off and just have some silence around you, and maybe go for a walk, or maybe just sit still and stare out the window, or just even, I talk about thinker moments. If you can train yourself to have a thinker moment, which is switch off to the external, switch on to the internal, allow your mind just to wander and daydream, stare at a beautiful picture or whatever, or close your eyes and imagine something beautiful and just let your mind wander. If you can do that for around 10 to 30 seconds every hour, and then for around 10 minutes every sort of few hours, you can keep the brain in a very restorative state. When the mind-brain-body connection, your psychoneurobiology, when you're in that state, you can recognize when you've stretched yourself, it's kind of like if you eat too much junk food, you don't know when to stop. But if you eat nutritious, healthy, grass-fed, etc., your body knows, your body gets full quickly. It's the same thing. If you don't manage your mind properly, which means if you don't let your non-conscious drive, your conscious mind just keeps looking for the wrong kind of stimulation. So you have to teach it. You have to train it to find the right balance.
Yeah. And everything you just said, that reminded me of something else I wanted to say thank you for emphasizing in your book, is the fact that anxiety, depression, OCD, you say that those are responses, right?
Yes.
Not illnesses. And again, I think that is one of the most empowering things someone who is struggling with those or any of those can hear. Because if it's a response, that means you can retrain yourself, right, to have a different response.
Absolutely. You are not depression. You are not anxiety. You don't have a mental illness. They're very overwhelming and they're very consuming because of the nature of them and because of the chaos they create, the chaos you spoke about earlier on. I mean, this kind of thing, if this thing is whatever you think about the most grows, and if something is not dealt with and you're just focusing on this only, it grows and it's very overwhelming. But it will impact and change your brain because you are this kind of thing will damage the brain, but it's not the brain causing it or the body causing it. It's the mind causing it in response to life experiences. So it's a way we process something, which then changes the brain. And then that feeds back into the mind, and then this conscious mind-brain feedback loop is set up. The big thing is to honor that and to recognize that it's very hard. You don't want to minimize, you want to maximize, but you want to maximize to control. When you just label it, you actually don't pay on, you kind of silence something so big into just a label or blaming the brain, and that's just not the case. The brain's being coded by the mind, so therefore what we need to do is stand back into our wisdom and into our solutions, which is the non-conscious, and then rewire. And it sounds easier than what it is, but I mean 40 years of research in this game, I have showed that you can improve anxiety, managing anxiety and depression, seeing it as a signal, not as an illness. By 35 to 80, by 81% improve, you can, they say that in a more simple way, you can get 81% control over anxiety and depression and make it work for you, not against you, when you understand how to manage your mind.
Right. No, that's so fascinating. I am curious too, Dr. Leaf, what does meditation look like for you in your daily routine? And I've heard a lot of different takes on this, because the traditional definition, right, of meditation is the concept of like emptying your mind. But from a biblical perspective, it's actually filling your mind, right? But filling your mind with God's word. So what does it look like for you?
Well, I reach an audience of, I'm spiritual, so I'm not necessarily one particular faith. So and I think what's very important is that we need to honor everyone's beliefs. Okay, so that's very important. So meditation is going to look different for everyone, but you can never empty your mind. So that's just a phrase that we've used. We don't have the language to really fully explain that experience when you go into a deep spiritual state. And going into a deep spiritual state means that you're tapping into your non-conscious level, and your non-conscious level is your spirit level, and the spirit level is where all your life experiences plus all your wisdom is, and that's connected to the source of wisdom, which Godness, whatever you want to call it. And from a biblical standpoint, it would be God. From another spiritual view, it may be the source, whatever it may be. But you are connected to that source. So when you meditate, it is tapping into that intuition, that wisdom. So it might look like a deeply insightful moment. It might look like you just staring at your computer and you suddenly look away and there's this quietness that comes on you and there's this aha. Or it might be that you close your eyes and you are doing an act of prayer, or you do some breathing and you calm yourself down, because when you breathe in, you're signaling to your physiology, your brain and body, that it's going to be okay. As you breathe out, you're telling your brain and your body it is okay. And as you do that, it calms down your neurochemistry and so on and your hormones. And then that might lead to maybe you say something like a little prayer or some sort of meditative ritual, and that calms you down. The words will calm you down more, and then that opens your mind to start sort of almost that daydreaming that I spoke about earlier on. And so that helps you to get to a state and you can start seeing maybe these intrusive thoughts that are popping up. Mm-hmm. And now in that particular moment, instead of reacting to the intrusive thought that's creating the chaos, you observe it. It's called the multiple perspective advantage. Yes. You put yourself in a state where you stand back and you're observing, as opposed to, so it's not emptying your mind. It's observing, okay, well, this seems to be coming up a lot, and this is now something, and it's like you're talking to yourself, this is okay, this is not who you are, this is something we can work on. So for this moment, thank you that I found this. Maybe you open your eyes and write write that down, and then you go back and just say, okay, this is something I can work through. So it's like a little exercise that you would move through. So you're not emptying your mind, for sure. But what they're trying to teach the people that teach meditation and so on, of all different faiths and belief systems, is to not be totally reactive in that moment to everything that's going on around you, to calm down that neurophysiology and to get yourself into that multiple perspective advantage state, and then to find those patterns that have become habits, and then not react to them in the moment, but put them aside, activate your resilience, and then slowly but surely come back and work on one at a time. That's kind of how I understand the science of meditation.
Right. No, that makes sense. And Dr. Leaf, I know we're coming up on time. One more quick question I did want to ask you.
Sure.
On the same wavelength as meditation, right? We hear mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is this phrase that's just thrown out there.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so interesting that you said our brain is actually not ever truly capable of being present in the moment because it always time travels. And that kind of helped me because I'm the type of person where I feel like I'm always living in the future. I'm never fully present. But to recognize that our brains actually don't have the power to be 100% present kind of took this weight off my shoulders, meaning there's nothing actually wrong with me. It's just how our brain functions.
Yeah, that's amazing that you picked that up. So good job for actually getting that insight. So that's that insight, that understanding you have. That's an example of your unconscious mind leading your conscious mind. So I wanted to say that as an aside. Yes. So remember, your brain doesn't think. Your brain can't do anything. Your brain is a very sophisticated machine that responds. It's computational. It's algorithmic, and it's coded by the mind. So, but that the mind, the non-conscious mind, is beyond space and time. It operates in the present, past, and future all at once, and that's driving you 100%. Your conscious mind is stuck in time. It's stuck in the now, and it's the now leading to the next moment, to the next moment. So we operate on those different levels. Now, all of that gets put into the brain, and so when we have an experience of feeling like we're not really present, that is the non-conscious filtering through your conscious and coding that in the brain, and then you become aware of that. In your psychoneurobiology can makes it all works together, and you become aware of that. So the more one is aware of that, that it shows the depth of you tuning into your non-conscious mind. So we're not stuck in space-time is not fundamental. Space-time, there's a deeper level that goes beyond space and time that is fundamental, and that's mind. That is not bound by present, past, and future. And we all have that sense, especially when we do things like meditation, or we think deeply, or we really, just think about the moments that we're in. Immediately the past and the future comes into that moment. So we're always operating in those levels. And then the brain just does what the mind tells it to do. It codes that and helps us to experience that physically.
Right. Yeah, we're always drawing from our experiences, as you said. Well, Dr. Leaf, we have covered so much, but I still feel like there's so much more I want to ask you. So I can't wait to do a round 2. But with that, where can listeners find you? Where can they pick up a copy of your latest book, Help in a Hurry?
Well, thank you for that. The book's available wherever books are sold. My website's drleaf.com. I've got a podcast, The Dr. Leaf Show. Currently we're running, I'm not sure if this is, I suppose you edit this too. Is this podcast going to be released this
next
month?
week?
Next week, okay. We're currently running a brain detox challenge, and that's basically it's every day I put up posts on social media. So obviously you can find me I'm on every platform.
Yes.
And that this challenge is basically, we do it every year in different ways. And I've released a course, and this course teaches you these principles we've been talking about. I walk you through this daily. That's what you mentioned. You're on day 2, and then there's also the app. There's 19 books in 24 languages. My older books aren't available anymore, but that's plenty. There's plenty of stuff. So the easiest place is to go to drleaf.com, and you'll find it all. And if you go to my social media pages, go to Instagram, Facebook, whatever, you can see the challenge and join the challenge.
So many incredible resources. I will link all of them in the show notes. And my very last question for you, Dr. Leaf, this is always my favorite one to ask, and that is, what does being well and strong mean to you?
It means that I'm managing my mind. For sure, because the mind drives everything else. So if my mind is managed, I'm well and strong.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Leaf, thank you so much for your time. I'm so excited to share this, and I can't wait for round 2.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.